clearly. I'm just looking at some of the people who are online here. I'd like to welcome you all. Hope you've been having an amazing weekend, at least got outside for a little while and had some good sunshine. Looks like I am live and the recording is in procession. So I'd like to welcome you all to the OC Yoga Festival, and joining me on my talk on how psychedelics can mitigate, reduce fear and anxiety. Sounds like a good subject, and hope you'll all enjoy my little talk, and we'll take some questions at the end later on. I'd like to thank the organizers of the OC Yoga Festival and Justin Stearman for inviting me to talk. Looks like we're up for a second round. So let's get into the heart of the matter by coming up with a definition. And we are talking about how fear can control one's life and change the course of one's life dramatically. So the definition is it's an unpleasant feeling triggered by the perception of danger, real or imagined. And the definition of anxiety is a mental health disorder characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with daily activities. Why does fear grip us and have a stranglehold around our neck, leaving us powerless to act? So what we found, for example, is when you're given information, how does that information affect you, and how do you make choices as a result of that information? Now, that information may or may not be true. It could be completely false, and yet when you take it to be the truth, sometimes you can make choices or decisions that are actually not in your favor. So for example, when COVID-19 came out, there was an upsurge in the number of suicides in the United States. And why would this happen? Why would a pandemic cause an upsurge in suicides? And so this is the nature of the mind. The mind comes up with these reasons that there's something called the fear of loss. I've lost my job. I don't have any money. How am I going to pay my bills or the rent? And so the mind and reality are two different things. And so what we do is we take that information and interpret reality accordingly, even if the information, as I'd said, is false. So one of the things, certainly as a species, is we don't do well in isolation. We are certainly social beings, and we want to feel that we belong. When we feel threatened and our survival is at stake, we may quickly lose hope and believe that there is no point in carrying on. And I think this is what has happened is when people have become too isolated, have lost touch with community, then it's easy to see how the mind can go out of control, or how easily the mind will go out of control, because we start surmising, making assumptions, projecting all sorts of negative things. And so perhaps on the one hand, this kind of isolation has been a real challenge as to the actual character of a person. In other words, as humans, we often go through these incredible trials of withstanding difficult times. And what we've seen throughout history is the amazing capacity that humans have to withstand incredible untold hardships, difficulties, and all sorts of things. So when we run out of money or incur too many debts, we can become full of fear. Ultimately, all of the fears that we can name are a subset of the one main fear, which is that of death. And so we even have in English special words for certain types of fear, such as being enclosed in a small space, claustrophobic, and so on. And as I said, ultimately, all these subset of fears are certainly encompassed by the granddaddy, which is that of death. Interestingly, we are programmed to survive no matter what the cost. So what then can override that program? How can a situation become so bad that a person is willing to forego their life? So let's go back in time to when a child, for example, was in the mother's womb. And that child took on the stresses of the mother. What influence did that have on the child? So that could be an interesting starting point. We could go back even further before the child was in the womb. We can go back into past lives and perhaps look at what that person is carrying through into this present life. And it's a great area of discussion that if things have not been resolved in past lives, does that mean that this is a chance to resolve and get past those events, those possible traumas? Is it something that we can actually resolve in this lifetime? And then again, the question comes up, if you don't manage in this lifetime, you have another lifetime. And do you have infinite lifetimes to figure it all out? And is there such a thing? Meaning, are you able to figure out and get to a place where you are actually trauma-free? Now, at an early age, a child may be neglected, abused, traumatized, and survival will kick in. In order to survive, strategies are needed. Strategies and coping mechanisms along with these is the development of the ego. And so if I define the ego, it could be strategies of coping mechanisms. And on the one side, these are survival. But on the other side, it's a program that gets you to an environment which you will become used to or familiar with and recreate that pattern throughout your life. So if the pattern is to live in abundance, to live in luxury, lots of money, good things, so to speak, what we found is a person can, through life circumstance, lose everything. And very quickly, the ego, part of the unconscious, gets to work, gets busy, and within a short time, a very short amount of time, that environment the person was used to is recreated. And suddenly they have lots of money, they have a good place to live, lots of abundance. So the ego is unbiased. Same thing, if the ego was programmed to be poor, the person can win the lottery. And statistically, they say over 90% of people who win the lottery spend the entire amount within 4 years. So this goes to show really the power of the unconscious programming and how it manifests as the ego. They say that by the time a child is 7, the ego is fully developed. And there is a saying by the priests in the temple, "Give me your child for the first 7 years." So in brackets, that means they have time, the first 7 years, to program the child. And then you can take the child back, but they know now that the child has been programmed, and this sets the course for his life. So what we're looking at then is, as a person develops and matures and grows up. So I like that saying, you can either grow up or you can grow old. And what we're looking at then is, if a person is maturing and their life is, for example, not in balance, there are struggles which they're not managing to get past, they have continuous issues, and they're not resolving this, then this is something that could be taken up by reflecting on the nature and function of the ego. And what sort of work is needed to be done to change that program. And so really that's the crux of this talk, is what are the things we can do in our life to change the program that is in the unconscious and results in a manifestation through the ego. So here I'll introduce what's called plant medicines, psychedelic medicines, spirit medicine, entheogens, a class of medicines that bring about altered states of consciousness. Altered states of consciousness is extremely significant. And what is the influence and impact it has whenever we move into an altered state of consciousness? Psychedelics influence several aspects of the psyche by allowing a person to journey into the spirit world beyond the veils of the third dimension. People who are always in this dimension, I say, can easily go mad, can easily lose it. When you're always in this dimension, you may be depressed, anxious, afraid, stressed, afraid of losing control. And in fact, where you perceive that you understand reality, you have actually become out of touch with reality. As soon as a person travels into the spirit world and gets to see themselves without the ego in place, that means that the medicine has, in a sense, helped to dissolve the ego. Some say disintegrate the ego. So without the ego in place, without all those boundaries and stories that we've been given and what we've been carrying our whole life, the horizon begins to open up and we start to see the big picture. Now, this is not an instant occurrence. It's not a one-time solution or fix it. So like any journey, there's work to be done. There may be much unraveling of how you got here in the first place, with all your baggage and all your ideas of how your life and life should be. The distinction between life and your fears is that life is just life in a completely unbiased way. So what you may want versus what life really is are two different things. For example, if you have a ball on the table and without any special forces or tricks, whatever, and you roll that ball off the table, life in its unbiased way will simply allow the ball to fall onto the floor. And as much as you don't want that to happen, you can repeat that experiment over and over, and it will remain in a predictable fashion, rolling off the table and onto the floor. So it's the same in your life. You may want something different, but in some ways, life is predictable in how it performs or behaves. Your fears are what you are interpreting to be life. Because life is paradoxical by nature, the more you want it to go in one direction, the more you find it going the opposite way. And I'm sure you can think about several occurrences or instances where you really wanted something, and the harder you tried, the more unattainable it became. Why this paradox? Why is life paradoxical? And how can psychedelics help? Some say the function of the ego is to meticulously recreate over and over the same environment you were in, which I'd mentioned earlier. And this has a lot to do with your childhood. So people find a recurring pattern in their life that they are unable to break out. For example, relationships, where we get into the same kind of relationship, we choose a similar person, and we do this over and over until perhaps one day the light turns on and we see the kind of repetitions we're making. You can look for a recurring pattern in your life that does not serve you and ask the question, why does this keep happening to me? We've seen miraculous turnarounds, for example, with people with PTSD who've been on a cocktail of pharmaceuticals showing no signs of improvement and may have become quite suicidal. By chance, they may have stumbled across a psychedelic medicine, such as psilocybin, and quite quickly they begin to show signs of remarkable improvement. The puppet masters, these are the priests, politicians, authorities, government, they understand the mechanism of fear well and have used this tactic on us humans for centuries. Once a person becomes afraid, they are controllable. However, some will rise to meet the challenge and face their fears, be they internal or external, and others will flee in flight from it. So there will always be times in our life when we have to confront our fears. The question is, have we done anything to prepare ourselves when that day comes? So what practice, what approach have you chosen in your life to help manage the stresses? Essentially, it's the stresses which tend to do so much damage. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, coined the word shadow, or our dark side. And we've seen in the news reports on the satanic side of Hollywood, prominent members of society, politicians and businesses being charged as pedophiles, all sorts of dreadful things. And I'm happy to say that this information is coming out in almost, you could say, torrents. And what was well hidden in the past is no longer being hidden anymore, and things have come to the surface. Facing our shadow and going into the shadow may often require external help. And this help may be in the form of psychotherapy, rehab centers, psychedelic medicines, meditation practices, and so on. So how do we get to encounter and work with our shadow, our fears? Now, the different psychedelic medicines have a unique characteristic and provide us an opportunity to look at our issues that we normally avoid and or are even out of touch with. It's important to mention that a psychedelic medicine is simply a tool. It won't necessarily give you the answer or figure out your life for you. It will give you something, and if you're willing to work with what gifts the medicine can bring, certainly you can resolve many issues and many of the struggles in your life. It can expand our vision, dissolve the ego, balance brain chemistry, and bring one into a state of samadhi, bliss, rapture, and the divine. And ultimately, it is the divine that we are all looking for. Even if it's just for a moment spent in divine is a life worth living. And this is our continuous search, be it in our waking hours or our sleep. What is common with psychedelic medicines is that they can provide a mystical experience. And this is a really important subject. People who have had mystical experiences say their lives are forever changed. So what does a mystical experience have to do with how we manage or handle fear? The mystical experience is known wherever baffled humanity has sought the meaning of the eternal mystery of life, a saying by Eustace Hayden. The most beautiful and profound emotion we can experience is the sensation of the mystical. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wander and stand wrapped in all that it is as good as dead. This knowledge, this feeling is at the center of true religion. In this sense only I belong in the ranks of devoutly religious men, a saying by Albert Einstein. And lastly, a definition of the mystical experience by William James, called The Varieties of Religious Experience, written in 1902, is the most well-known treatment of such mystical experiences from their Western point of view. James has 4 defining marks of mystical experiences, and they are ineffability. It defies expression. No adequate report of its contents can be given in words. It follows from this that its quality must be directly experienced. It cannot be imparted or transferred to others. Noetic quality. States of insight into depths of truth and unplumbed by the intellect. They are illuminations, revelations full of significance and importance. They carry with them a curious sense of authority for after time. Then we have transiency. Mystical states cannot be sustained for long. Often when faded, their quality can but imperfectly be reproduced in memory. And lastly, we have passivity. The mystic feels as if his own world were in abeyance, as if he were grasped by and held by a superior power. And these are 4 states which, if you've had a mystical experience, are quite familiar. And so, again, a person who is willing to go more and more into mystical states will find a very, very different life. And it's interesting how the energy of a mystic person is different from, I call, the 3rd dimension person. Often if you look at a person who's had these transcendent experiences, they seem to be calm, collected, at peace. And it's not that easy to get them riled up. It's not that easy to get them off their balance. And this is a great clue or a hint as to what happens when you travel into the spirit world and have these altered states of consciousness and alternative experiences. People who say they were touched by the divine and know what it is like to be in a state of grace are no longer in fear. I want you to draw an imaginary reference line called fear. Is the line high up or low down or somewhere in the middle? I want you to think about how willing you are to risk in your life and be impulsive. How much do you conform to the whims of society, your family, your job? In other words, what are you willing to do to fit in? Now think about some of the outrageous things you've done in your life. And will that continue as you get older? Or do you find that you're playing it more safe? Meaning, did you have wild teenage years or in your 20s, and then you begin to settle down? Or do you find that you're still doing impulsive things at the spur of the moment, booking a ticket, going to some strange destination, doing still what is considered crazy things? And why do you do them? And what does it give you in your life? Now, have you ever had a mystical experience, and how did it change your life? What happened to the overall fear content as a result of that experience? What raises your self-confidence, and what are the elements that diminish it? What is your level of passion in life? And how willing are you to embrace life with all its passion and challenges? And what does it mean for you to be passionate versus being afraid? And so all of these questions, you can think back to your behavior, what you are willing or not willing to do throughout your life. What have you created that reflects back to your past? I remember there was a drawing, a cartoon, where this person is sitting on a very comfortable couch, and there's a balloon above the couch saying your comfort zone. And then there's another balloon far off on the one side of the drawing, which says where the magic happens. And so that's the price that we pay. Being comfortable often means being mediocre or dull, but those who are willing to risk, go out on a limb, meet the different challenges, and go particularly into what I call the unknown, have obviously a very, very different life. So you can see where I'm going with this thread, where this is an opportunity for you to reflect on your own life and think about these different questions. I've been in ceremony where a woman said for the first time in her life, she has felt at peace, no longer afraid, and could finally relax. I've known people who've used psychedelics many times and are stuck and have not managed to find the love they have for themselves. I would say in all my years working with psychedelics, the vast majority of people benefit immensely by its use. and I'll emphasize when correctly, properly taken under the right circumstances. So how can you use it wisely and help you through your own personal fear? We have a psychedelic renaissance going on right now. And this is what you may say is perfect timing of what's happening in the world we live in. Very uncertain times, great fears have manifested themselves beyond the norm. And the old draconian ways have brought us to a crossroad. It is clear we cannot keep going on this way. When medicine is used wisely, we navigate within to find our own inner strength. And this is something that you will look for in any journey, in any altered state of consciousness. Where are you in all of this? Perhaps you're seeing all sorts of images, you may be hearing sounds, but where is that thread of consciousness? And how does all of these experiences make you feel? Ultimately, the inner strength is that component that shows you the love that you have for yourself and for life itself. And in finding that inner strength, that is where you mature. That is where you become confident in where life will take you and your ability to handle whatever is thrown your way. So a great acceptance settles over us, that we cannot be threatened, we cannot be swayed. Our very fabric is that of love and not of fear. Once you have found yourself, no one can ever take that away from you. You can never be put in a box or a cage or behind bars. Here's a short phrase from the book The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams Bianco. This little excerpt I really love. And it begins, "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. So you are free. Fear will not override your consciousness. It is in that freedom that you can go out and touch the lives of others. You will be a light and an inspiration to those around you. Those out there very quickly pick up on your energy. As you help them to grow, the old dark forces begin to fall away and the fear evaporates. In these times of confusion, doubt, and uncertainty, look within for your own guidance. Seek community to nourish you. Reach out and let yourself be heard. There are many practices that a person can do to bring out their true self. My practice has been with psychedelics and other forms of meditation, yoga, being in the great outdoors. So I have many practices. All of them contribute little by little to the kind of person I am. And it's the same for you, that when you have different practices and you can intertwine them, merge them together, what will that do and enhance your growth? So there are so many different types of practices. And as mentioned, different meditations, there's different forms of yoga, breath work. Some people like extreme sports. Others will use Tantra as a form of bringing up their consciousness. Could be in the kitchen cooking. It's an endless list. So let's talk about the different psychedelics and how they can be of help. Now, depression is common amongst millions of people, and it is a persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest in life. There are many fears associated with depression and anxiety, and in Chinese medicine, it is considered to be anger directed inwards. So there are three psychedelic medicines that are being used with great success in the world, in the world of altered states of consciousness. The first is psilocybin cubensis, known as magic mushrooms, and it will soon be changed from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3. Although I don't call it a drug, I use that word more for pharmaceutical substances or synthetics that pharmaceutical companies have come out with. So Schedule 3 is known as therapy-assisted medication. The second is ketamine, and also it shows really remarkable and great therapeutic effects. This particular substance is well known for its dissociative properties. When a person feels they are no longer caught up in whatever is happening to them, they feel great relief and let go. And perhaps that's what it is at the end of the day, is whenever you can separate yourself from the challenges and struggles and stresses, and you have a moment to really relax deeply, have a moment to somehow rest in a cool or calm body of water where you simply feel yourself dissolving. This then seems to be the key for sanity. But people who are so worked up that even when they go to bed at night, they don't sleep well, they don't rest, and in the morning it continues, quite soon they feel exhausted. They can't cope anymore, and hence the term breakdown. How many people do you know, have you known, who've had breakdowns, and the reason behind that, and perhaps yourself? And then what has happened after that breakdown? So we have a proactive side or choice where we can do things in our life never to get to that place of breakdown. But the good news is we are resilient, and even if a person has had a breakdown, often they will tell me what they found and what inner strength and courage they have found to get them back into balance, back to strength, to the point where this will never happen again. There's no chance that this person will have a breakdown unless it's so extreme or really too traumatic. And the third one is MDMA, or the amphetamine class. And this helps to relieve depression and has shown really great things for people who have been suffering from PTSD. The thing with MDMA is it's classically known as the great heart opener. And it puts people into the state of real openness feelings of unimaginable love for themselves, for the world, for those around them. And the person gets to bathe in those feelings for a few hours. When they can take that feeling, even when the substance has worn off, and they can integrate that into their lives, that's where we've seen really tremendous turnarounds. People who've been suffering from PTSD no longer seem to be caught in that grip. Now, the mushrooms, for instance, and with many of the other medicines, there are essentially two approaches that help people through their condition. So we have what's called microdosing and the ceremonial dose. And there's lots of discussion nowadays on microdosing and its benefits. And we've seen even over a relatively short period of time, a few weeks, where a person has been microdosing, that they've really received a lot of benefit. So in a nutshell, a microdose would be typically a 10th or a 20th of a full dose. So with mushrooms, if you're taking between 100 to 300 milligrams given daily over a relatively, let's say, short period of time, 2 weeks, many of the even clinical depressed people have recovered sometimes more than 80%. And so the question here is, if a person is on pharmaceuticals and antidepressants, how they can start to reduce their dependence on pharmaceuticals and slowly wean themselves off that by using the psilocybin mushroom to help them with what I call brain chemistry repair. And as that happens, then the depression begins to lift. The feelings that a person often has through pharmaceuticals is that of no feeling. And many people have described to me that all they are zombies. They can function, they can be in the world, but they can't really feel life. And as a person begins to taper off with the pharmaceuticals, if, for example, the mushrooms are effective, then they are really bringing about a good, true healing. Now, a full dose of mushrooms is usually 2 grams or more. If you're familiar with the talks and books of Terence McKenna, he talks about the hero's dose being 5 grams. And he makes the comment that if you take less than 5 grams, you may see up on the hill, I don't exactly remember his description, but there is the Grand Palace. And you drive your car along the road and you get into the parking lot of the palace. And that's where you're going to stay on less than 5 grams of mushrooms. But once you've taken the hero's dose, whatever that is for you, you get to enter the palace. But that takes a little courage. Now, mushrooms, by the way, is part of the DMT family, or the tryptamines. And you can read James Orick's book, written in 1984, called The Tryptamine Palace. And DMT is really on the psychedelic map these days. Another type of DMT, so we have mushrooms is a type of DMT. Then another type is ayahuasca, and that's known as NN-DMT, DMT being dimethyltryptamine, so the tryptamine family. And for me personally, I find there are many similarities between taking mushrooms and ayahuasca, especially with the visuals. The way that we receive messages in altered states of consciousness is through different mediums, and everyone has their own medium or interpretation. So entities may appear to you or before you. Various archetypes can appear, ancestors, grandmothers, grandfathers, people who have left this world. Psychedelic visuals such as fractals and geometric shapes, sacred geometry, fantastic landscapes, other worlds. We may hear voices, sounds, and songs. And these can all be messages, and in a sense are helping to guide you for you to get better understanding of who you are. These messages, therefore, can bring deep insight and help us let go of fears we've been carrying since childhood, or even past lifetimes. When we let go of fear, our life begins to change, and we have a new capacity to make decisions from a place of love. And here's another important point I want you to think about, is what is the quality and nature of your decision-making ability? Meaning, if you look at several decisions that you've made, what are some of those elements? How do you come to making a decision? And so we have the two extremes. On the one side, you will have a person, let's say, who's very impulsive, who's very, you could even say intuitive. They don't think about it. They simply go for it. There it is. And they kind of either say, well, good luck. Let's hope it works out. Or we'll give it a shot another time. And then on the other side of the pendulum is the careful person in their decision making. And they may research and research and research, and even not be able to come to a place of making a decision. So this is the level, perhaps the level of fear, where a person wants to be so certain that they are making the right decision, they can't. Obviously, the balanced person is somewhere in the middle, where there comes a time that they need to be impulsive and use their intuition. But for other matters, it may take a little longer and they do their research and homework. However, through those both sides, do you ever ask yourself, am I approaching this out of fear or out of love? And if I'm approaching what's happening out of fear, can I change that? If I'm approaching this through love, well, then well and good. Now, there's another psychedelic discovered by Albert Hofmann back in 1938, known as LSD, and it has changed the lives of millions of people. Its popularity remains as strong today as it was back in the 50s and the 60s. This is still being used in a therapeutic sense, but back in the 60s particularly, there were many therapists who were using it consciously. And I'm pleased to say that once again, it's been taken up in the therapeutic world and is also helping many, many people. Has it helped with fear? Well, what we know is it changes one's perception, as in Aldous Huxley's book, Doors of Perception. Any change of perception changes one's programming and ego content. Now, there's two other medicines which are currently being used a lot for people with addictions. So the well-known medicine for addiction is ibogaine, the extract from iboga. However, they found that when that is complemented also with the use of 5-MeO-DMT, the recovery of the addicted person tends to be a lot higher or stronger. One of the comments about these medicines is that they reset the receptors in the brain back to a prior addicted state. And so the person, after they've gone through these medicines, no longer have that craving for their next fix, be it for alcohol, for heroin, for opioids, so many different elements that a person can become addicted to. Now, there is a doctor who has an addiction clinic in Vancouver. His name is Gabor Mate. And he's published a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Essentially what he claims or says, and he even talks about his own addictive personality, is that the addicted person is always in search of dopamine. And he talks about he being traumatized early in his childhood. And what that trauma does is it suppresses the production of dopamine. And so then that person has a tendency to easily become an addict of sort, because they're always in search of this dopamine feeling or rush. And so we can also talk about that if you have any questions. So ultimately, it is your consciousness and awareness that determines your level of fear and how you play it out in the world around you. It is your awareness that will give you the courage to go through the fear and shine your light in its face. So that concludes my talk, and we still have a few minutes I wanted to leave open. So if any of you have some questions, please go ahead. Thank you.